Well, I was born in a time when the dawning of modern technology was just bursting on the scene. The big passion of the period was the cinema. This big thing called the movies, and everybody was just caught up in it with such tremendous sense of opportunity, sense of there was a passion about it, because the film brought into one's life the stories of such strange and faraway places and strange and faraway beings. And as much as that could be appreciated and was, it wasn't until sound came into the cinema world that I think the greatest appreciation of what sound could do matched to what the visual could do, that everybody really saw a relentless future for the technology of these two things. Prior to that, the social embrace for people in large groups or small groups, mostly in large groups, was really around the earliest of recordings, the gramophone, the RCA Victor, wind-up box. All those things were known to most people, not just the rich, who had the more elaborate designs, but everybody had a little Victrola. And it wasn't so much an individual experience as it was a community experience, because you were never, in my house, we were never permitted to play it without adult supervision, and you could only touch the records under adult guidance, because it was the most precious thing we owned, this little box from which you could put in this disc, and out would come the music that began to shape everybody's tastes and open up everybody's minds to what was out here in the world at large. And I used to remember listening to it around early classical records, the early stuff done by classical singers and opera singers, Caruso and others. And we didn't really come close to pop culture because there wasn't that much around from the pop culture perspective. When I was born in 1927, it had just begun to spread its capacity to be all-consuming. I'm talking about the record, the invention of the record machine. And it was still in a very highly experimental stage. But it was my earliest introduction to all the jazz musicians of the period. As hard as it was to hear, and as crude as a lot of the stuff was in its acoustical delivery, it nevertheless gave you a chance to hear some of the remarkable sounds of the time. I remember Paul Whiteman when he came out with his first big band record. I'm not putting these in terms of chronology. It's just as I recall them in my childhood, in my youth. Early Louis Armstrong, early Dixieland stuff, even stride music and stuff that was played by Jelly Roll Morton. All those early jazz things that came into being, early songs sung like by Bessie Smith and some of the great blues singers of that time. We had these precious gifts in our midst, and they were under the most highly protected circumstances. Don't touch them, don't scratch them, wear gloves when you put them on the machine. It was a ritual. The records as such never really became part of my life until after I'd come back from the Caribbean, because I was born in New York. And my mother was an immigrant woman, and for all intent and purposes, she was a single parent. My father was a drifter. He was a seaman, and he was a cook, and he was always at sea. And when he was back home, he was hardly at home. And he's quite a philanderer and a hard drinker, and a man who was prone to violence. And he was not necessarily a joyous need in our life. As a matter of fact, whenever we heard he was coming home, it was fraught with more pain than it was expectations for things joyous. And my mother, who was left to bring her children up, she had us much too young. I'm convinced she had us as a teenager, although she never divulged her age or revealed exactly how old she was, but I suspect she had to be somewhere around 15 or 16. And she just felt that for the safekeeping of her children, we would be better off somewhere in the Caribbean, back in the village in which she was born, to be brought up by the village as opposed to being left to the wilds of New York when she was off working at night doing domestic work, which was her skill, and off during the day trying to find part-time work and not being able to really hover over her children as she dearly wanted to do. Because even though life caught her bringing children into the world when she was most ill-equipped to do that, she never lost her integrity of being a mother. She really desperately cared for her children and protected us. And where her instincts came from and how she developed those caring gifts that she brought us, I was hard pressed to tell, but she was just right on the money. She took care of her kids the best she knew how, and in ways that were the best. So when I went down to the Caribbean to be awarded to strangers as well as family, the best thing that happened to me there was being able to hear the music of people, just ordinary, everyday working people who sang all day long. My family were plantation workers. They were harvesters. They attended to bananas and sugarcane harvesting and banana chopping. They loaded the ships from the United Fruit Company down in the docks. They sang these songs that helped them with the burden of cruel labor and relentless hours. And when we came home at night, we got around a fire. People just pulled out whatever instruments they had. Some people had a harmonica. Somebody may have had a kind of a ukulele. It wasn't quite a guitar. And these ukes would come out and guys would play them and sing the Calypso songs and the folk songs of the period. And they had these little boxes that you could sit on with these thumb bass boxes. And you just played these notes on this bass box. And once in a while, somebody would show up with a wind instrument, more often than not a clarinet. And you'd have a three-piece band, this bass box, the ukulele, and a clarinet, and three guys who could really make a song happen. And much of our culture was around the songs of the people. And as a matter of fact, Calypso songs, which were really the origins of Trinidad, but quickly found its way into every aspect of life within the Caribbean region, especially the English Caribbean region. It was our living newspaper. The Calypso song was not just telling us of songs of humor and songs of sexual promiscuity and all the things they did. They were also our living newspapers. I remember when I was a kid in 1938, I think it was 38, when King Edward abdicated the throne. The first we knew about that was a Calypso singer Nobody in the village knew that King Edward had finally given up the throne for Wally Simpson until the Calypso singer. It was love, love alone, caused King Edward to leave the throne. It was love, 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 love alone, caused King Edward to leave the throne. I don't know what the woman got in she born, made the man leave the throne. It was love, 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 love alone, caused King Edward to leave the throne. That's how we knew that the King of England had abdicated. So, the Calypso song is a strange creature, and all the things that it did. Anyway, the only kind of recorded music that I remember in the Caribbean was in the big house, which sat on a hill that was owned by the landowners. And they had this BBC Overseas radio. And on any Sunday, you could pipe in, because it would be in the evening in England, and on the BBC shortwave, it would be the morning in the Caribbean, and we'd hear this realm of music with Sir Thomas Beecham, I think, was the conductor of the London Symphony, and we'd be sitting in the field listening to Beethoven and to Mozart. And here I was sitting in the heart of the Caribbean, being introduced to classical music, booming through this rather well-endowed farmhouse. The acoustics were so good, you could sit outside and hear Beethoven. And from that moment on, I found myself in a relationship to music in places that held for me all sorts of rewards. There was no place that I went where I found music that I didn't find myself embraced by a moment that was stimulating, that was instructive, that gave me insight into people and lives and cultures. So from these earliest of encounters, workers in the field listening to the radio from the big house, in New York when I was a kid watching my parents and people in the family putting together the records, it was just a nice musical environment.